Many entrepreneurs that I've met are very excited about their idea, but really don't have the understanding of who they are and who they'll need in the process.
I value my time so much more than I did several years ago because it's that currency that we just won't get back.
There's been health professionals that accuse me and our company of profiting off of the illness of others. I can't think of one person that I've met in the health sector in the past 15 years that's trying to do it for what I'll call the wrong reasons.
Conventional versus unconventional, forging your own path. What does it take to create your own path? What does it mean to hold your ground and follow your dreams? I sat down with entrepreneur Rohit Joshi, CEO of Bright Squid, who has over 20 years of experience working in the US and Canada, and in my opinion, extremely knowledgeable and well-versed in privacy and compliance in healthcare information exchange. Rohit shares his journey as an entrepreneur, the misconceptions about data, particularly health data.
So thank you so much for coming.
I'm so happy to do it.
Rohit, you are one of my favorite people.
Thank you.
And I'm so excited for this.
Well, me too. Me too.
So let's start, because I think we have very similar backgrounds. I'm a first-generation Canadian.
Yes.
Parents immigrated here several years ago. I know you are the same.
Yeah.
Growing up.
Several further years. many years earlier than your parents.
Age is only a number. It's how we feel inside that matters.
That's true.
And when we were growing up, I'm curious to hear about your experience. There's a lot of pressure, right?
Oh, yeah.
You were either groomed to be a lawyer, a pharmacist, a doctor, an accountant,
Yeah.
pretty much that was it.
Yeah.
And then when I chose to do business, everyone was, what are you doing? Is that even a career?
Yeah.
Does that even make sense? So curious to hear, was that similar to you as well?
Yeah, for us, there was only like 3 things we could do. And so it was a doctor, engineer, and then you would normally think lawyer, but my father and my grandfather come from a long line of teachers. And so it was a doctor, engineer, or teacher.
Huh.
Those are my 3 options.
Okay.
And so I started in academia in biology. And so I did my undergrad, and then I did my grad school with a guy named Cy Frank, who is a fantastic innovator, an orthopedic surgeon. And so my mom just sort of expected that this is going to go into law school.
Right.
Med school. So when I got into law school, she was like, oh. And then when I left law to become an entrepreneur,
Right.
She was like, oh.
What did I do wrong?
She was so proud of me in her own way. But it was tougher to tell everybody, what I did because, it was being an entrepreneur. And there's no entrepreneurs in my family. Like, it just was never anything.
So you broke the mold. You went from a very conventional
Yeah.
to an unconventional
Very
path.
much so, yeah.
So how did you forge your own way? So you went from being a very successful lawyer to being a serial successful entrepreneur. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I didn't spend that long in law, and it was, it was in the early 90s, and my specific interest was in intellectual property and corporate commercial law. And in intellectual property world, there wasn't all that much going on in the 90s in Calgary. You had to be at a big firm, and then you had to kind of wait for the work. And so for me, I made the decision pretty early to join, a company that I had known for a while as their corporate lawyer, and realized pretty quickly we didn't need a corporate lawyer. We just needed more business. And then found my passion through that. And so it was kind of, it was difficult to leave, but in the other way, I was so much happier just working in business and trying to get more business and I found it really creative and it would keep me awake at night in a good way. And I didn't get that when I was looking at other people's contracts.
Right.
Or, yeah.
What were those moments, those nuggets of wisdom, learning? Because I think people have this misconception that running your own business is super easy, right? Because they always look at the end game. You're super successful and
Yeah.
you're out, you're talking on a whole bunch of panels.
Yeah.
You're, in market. And so they don't really see what happens behind the scenes, those challenging moments, those moments when, you're really questioning, did I make the right decision? Where were those moments for you where you were, no, I totally made the right decision?
So they're still happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you make it sound like at some point I might have not felt like that.
Right.
They're still happening.
That's amazing.
And it's, and when people look at the success, they look at the 2% of businesses that are
That's right.
successful. They don't talk to the 98%. And there's been lots of 98% in my career and in many of my friends' careers. People that are diligent, hardworking, excellent people that for whatever reason, it didn't work. And so it's a constant state of question. And to the point where, I see it as a selfish endeavor for me personally, like what I'm doing now.
That's so interesting. Why would you say that?
Because I'm so fulfilled in doing it.
Right.
But I could have made more money doing something else. I could have had way more freedom doing other things. I could have been probably a better parent, a better husband if I had done that, because that one's a big question mark. Because when I do talk to my wife about it, she's like, yeah, but you were so happy that's the energy that we took, right? But it occurs to me, my friends who I graduated law school with are doing very, very well as senior partners in their firms. And I'm still questioning if I've made the right choice.
Right. So this is
Well, and
interesting.
so are they.
Aren't we all every day? Don't we all
Every day.
pretend at some
This
point?
is every day. Yeah.
So I caught myself there because you said selfish, and I reacted in a way that almost may be perceived as negative. But I think it's also because selfish in and of itself is perceived as negative, which it's not.
No.
So I want to change the narrative on
Totally.
that because I just caught myself reacting.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be vulnerable here and, recognizing my behavior because I think that's important and being just self-aware. And you switch that narrative, and selfish isn't a bad thing. It shouldn't be perceived as a negative
No.
thing. So let's talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
so
that.
so selfish was so here's why I call it selfish.
Okay.
There was many forks in the road. There still are. And I will make a decision based on what feels right to me. And I do have a broader context. I think about my family, my friends, my clients, everybody. But ultimately I kind of have to go back to me and say, what's going to be fulfilling, and how do I chart that course?
Right.
Because I have been in startups where the money's flowing and it's exciting and I go home wondering about other things. Like I go
Right.
home unfulfilled.
Right.
And so maybe that's the benefit of time, but that's why I call it selfish. Is it's very personal and it's going to be individual for everybody. And so that's why I use that term.
I love it.
There's other things that I could have done that would have made more money, spent more time with my family, on and on and on.
But
But
is
I
it
didn't.
worth it?
I don't
Right,
know. We'll never know. And that's why I've made those decisions really for me.
Right.
And I've consulted others, but those decisions have been ultimately for me.
Which I think is a gift because we look at time when we're younger, time is of no value
Sure.
to us. We walk through life, and I think as you get older, at least for me, I value my time so much more than I did several years ago
Sure.
because it's that currency that we just won't get back. Today, in this moment, is the youngest we'll ever be ever.
I love that. Yeah, it's so true.
Right? And so this whole you choosing to move from law to startup and just the desire of doing something you're passionate about and waking up every day is admirable, right? And so what are those lessons that you learned along, because you're saying it's still a journey, there's still a
man.
lot of questions.
Yeah. And so it would be a mistake to think that it's, every morning I wake up fulfilled.
Right.
Every morning I wonder,
I love that.
was this the right thing?
I love that.
And it's not a, stamp of fulfillment. It's not that at all. I've never, but there's something about engagement maybe that's maybe where it's more interesting for me. Like the hard times have never been harder at business,
Right.
because it's everything I've got on the line.
Right.
The really successful times have never been more proud. And so how do you balance that kind of, bipolarness?
Right.
And the answer for me has been fulfillment, because I've never been pushed harder to do what I have to do every day. We were talking earlier just about, what does your week look like?
Right.
I've never been pushed harder. And here we are.
Here we are.
And it's awesome.
So do you feel as though there's almost that additional level of like resiliency, or you've surprised yourself that you've been able to overcome so much? Because I mean, they say, we are stronger than we think we are. When we are put in very adverse, challenging environments,
Totally.
we always somehow get through it as human beings because of our resiliency.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think if we sort of look at the growth for resiliency as people or as individuals, I think you only get there if you've failed enough times and in small enough ways that you can recover.
I love that.
And so there's this theory about a lot of younger kids who are facing anxiety now because they weren't allowed to fail.
Right.
As younger kids. Boy, have I been resilient.
And we were also, you were never allowed to get less than an A.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Your
yeah,
report
totally.
cards, and this was back in the day where you had the report cards and all the letters, and you had to hand it to your parents. My mom would look at that and she'd be like, B-. We got to talk. And I'd just, okay, Mom, head down, just complete disappointment.
So true.
And then you would get an A, and it's like, really, you didn't get an A+? So it's like, come on, nothing's enough, nothing's enough. And so it's those moments that really help you along. But I think we also don't talk about our failures enough.
Yeah.
Because I think there's this sense of, well, if I share my failures, will that be perceived as not successful? And how will people, absorb or react to that type of narrative or messaging?
Yeah.
So if you look, based on what you know now, and all of the lessons and the failures and those micro moments, would you have still gone from law to starting your own business?
Yeah, so yes. From law, and in my progression, I didn't always start my businesses. Sometimes I joined startups that were already established. And I would, because it has provided me a level of, career flexibility, chasing more interests, being more selfish. Because I continue to find stuff that I'm very, very interested in. And that becomes my path for whatever, a year, or in this case, 14.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give young entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs, innovators, researchers who have this massive idea, who want to start a business? What would you say to them? I know I'm putting you on the spot. It's a loaded question.
No, boy, that's a tough one, because I think you have to know yourself well enough. It's not even about the idea. That's
like that. Let's dig
entirely
into that.
It's entirely secondary.
Do you mean having confidence in your own abilities to actually execute? Or what do you mean by knowing yourself?
Yeah. So very few individuals are going to have everything they need in order to be a successful entrepreneur. So it's knowing yourself well enough to know what your team looks like. And knowing yourself well enough to say, you know what, I'm really not that good at that. I need that guy. And I'm not going to make it without that person.
Right.
Many, many entrepreneurs that I've met are very excited about their idea, very excited about their idea. but really don't have the understanding of who they are and who they'll need in the process. And and you can be guided along that. You know, people say, well, you need to raise money, or you need to do this sort of product, or you need to do this. That's fine. But it's knowing who you are to figure out who's it going to take to surround myself with in order to rise, to get through that ladder, get through those challenges, because I'm not going to do it by myself.
I love that. I love that.
You know, like even there's great writers. Anthony DeMello is a great writer. He's got a bunch of great books. He's a Jesuit priest who grew up in India.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things he talks about in one of his books is the value of charity to you. So he calls charity a selfish act.
I would agree with that, actually.
And so it's always stuck with me. I read his book, I don't know, 30 years ago. And it's always stuck with me to be very conscious of not portraying myself to be doing something good for mankind or humankind.
Right.
It's really just about me.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
But just to be aware of that,
Right.
so I don't get deluded in the whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because it's just about me.
It's true, because when you do something, a charitable act, you donate money, you volunteer at a run, you do it because it makes you feel good.
Totally.
Because it makes you feel like you're giving back, like you're supporting the greater good, giving back to society. But you're right. It is, in a way, this weird dynamic of, like, this paradox, right?
Yeah.
Because you're getting
You're giving,
something in return.
but you're probably getting
More.
You must be getting more.
Right. You must. I love that.
It keeps you from being a martyr to all of it too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very, very neat. So, healthcare data.
Yes.
We got
Healthcare
to
data.
we got to get into this because
Yeah.
it's a hot, spicy topic,
It is,
if you will.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot of maybe lack of literacy, a lot of misinformation. We saw that coming out of COVID, but
Yeah.
even prior to COVID, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around healthcare data. I think there's the public side, which is, just general public perception. And then I think there's this whole other side of healthcare practitioners, physicians, nurses, allied health professionals, and their potential perceptions, misconceptions on healthcare data. Healthcare data has been a very hot topic, ChatGPT and others, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think the misconceptions are as it relates to healthcare data? I know this one's a big one.
No, this is a good one. And so there's a couple of things. So if we're looking for misconceptions, the first misconception around healthcare data, I think the first proposition, let me start there. First proposition around healthcare data is that we could solve enormous amounts of pain and suffering if we knew more about the data. The misconception is that it's accessible, and a further misconception that somehow privacy has trumped our access to that data. And so have spent a lot of time looking at privacy laws and privacy regulations and access to data. And I would tell you that the challenge is not technical, it's not legal, it's administrative. It's people who don't know who are guiding the decisions about access. That's the misconception. The misconception is, well, we don't have access today because there's a technical issue. Not true. There's a lot of greed involved,
Right.
but that's not about access to data. Access to data is not hard from a technical perspective. Access to data is challenged by privacy, but in my view, not the barrier. It's the barrier in a lot of people's minds. It's because I've met many less qualified privacy professionals who will hold that up as a barrier. Sorry, you can't see their data because of privacy laws. It's usually not true. It's usually not true. The laws are there to support exactly what we're trying to do. And yeah, there's of course, laws make things cumbersome. And there are steps, and there's challenges, and we could improve. I agree with all that. But to hold that up as a barrier, I think is is a misconception.
So how do we educate or change the narrative of the public around healthcare data?
That's tough because there's so little literacy in what's possible and what isn't possible around people's data. There's such little literacy, people don't know what they're fighting for. So, in Canada, the patients do own their own data. And if we start with that proposition and say, okay, you or I could get all of the medical data that is relevant to us, we could have it ourselves. People don't even, I think, appreciate that fact. But if we start from there and say that is your right, we can start to then really talk about the benefits of that data. But until we get people educated and literate about the fact that they do have access to their data, they just need to ask for it.
Right.
And then the administrative burden in actually getting that data is massive.
Right.
So we have rights to it. We should have access to it. And now we can figure out as humans, as Canadians, what we want to do with that. That's the right path to chart, because I think we've been waiting for the administrators, the regulators, the lawyers to kind of make that all okay. I think that's a long ways away. Privacy in Canada is a judgment call in many cases. What I'm going to say is not going to threaten your privacy might be quite different than someone else would say.
Right.
And because of that, your privacy rights are in part what you argue for.
That's so interesting because I think there's this whole notion of patient advocacy.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think that people don't really know
Yeah.
what their rights are in this space.
Agreed.
Traditionally, it was very, and it still is in a way, provider-centric. You go to your doctor tells you XYZ, here are your symptoms, here's your diagnosis. You go home, you're on this whole care regimen, you take all these antibiotics, drugs, whatever the case is, and you don't ask questions. That's how it was traditionally.
Totally.
Now, patients are going into the physician office knowing at least 3 of the outcomes or diagnoses they might have.
Yeah.
They've done research on what potential medications are required. They're coming with a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah.
But I think still the healthcare data piece is not really integrated in that. And it's interesting because my GP just closed down her office. And I get a call saying, oh, you can pay $100 for all your medical information.
Yeah.
And to do that is also an administrative burden.
It is.
I have to call this line. There's like a whole bunch of process. I have to fill out all these forms. Rather than feeling empowered to say, okay, here is what I need to do, as opposed to talking to several other people.
Yeah, or, put it on this memory stick,
Right.
right? Which is, it'll take you 15 minutes.
Right. Or communicating with your physician through a secure network via email.
Yeah.
Or
Attach it to my file.
right. And so I think this is a very obvious complex issue.
Yeah.
Do you think it would help to embed this in curriculums early? Elementary, junior high, high school, to empower human beings from a health perspective? Because I think health is moving from acute care to the home.
Yeah.
You're starting to see that shift. People are now using mobile apps as opposed to going into a general practitioner's office.
Yeah.
So where do you think it's going?
I think there's a couple of things. One is the medical system itself, the training and education systems are changing to deal with the new reality of patient empowerment. Because as you've said, that was not the typical way people were getting information.
Right.
And so the medical expectation has to change at the profession. I've been in multiple discussions, for example, of once data is available to the patient or to the doctor, should it be simultaneously available to the patient? Many discussions. And there's some level of fear around that, where the physician would like a week's advance notice so that they can reach out to the patient. And so this is it's a hot topic, and it's right now, like these are discussions in Alberta,
Yeah.
because we all want our data, and Alberta for one has gotten very much quicker at getting that data to the patient.
Right.
But once you look at diagnostic imaging and all the information that is available to the doctor, patient empowerment means that comes to the patient.
Right.
The doctors have some legitimate concerns. I'm not saying they don't, for sure, around the early release of data. But I think that type of empowerment is something that needs to be taught to individuals, for sure, patients. But I think it's going to start with the profession saying, hey, patient, you have access to your data.
Right.
And the patient simultaneously asking for their data.
Right. I was gonna say, what if it was the other way around?
Like in Alberta now, I think there's over around 1.5 million patients who have access to their blood work by connecting to My Health Records. That's a pretty significant
It's
amount
huge.
of the population. So that stuff is happening, but it's happening in concert.
Right. So what is your perspective on the public perception around companies having data, right?
Oh.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of chatter, if you will. So ChatGPT, everyone's talking about ChatGPT. We have, several weeks ago, Jeffrey Hinton left Google because of, misalignment. And, I think I saw him say something was stated in an article somewhere that, just because we could build it, should we?
Yeah.
Something around that.
Sure.
And now everyone's using ChatGPT. And it's, spread virally through, across the globe. So what is your maybe words of wisdom or moment of education as we talk about literacy and the public of people thinking that, companies own that data versus, patient owning their own data?
Yeah. Listen, I think there's cause for concern. Because most of the health data in Canada is held on systems that are operated by TELUS or Loblaws. And so is there a connection? Is there a concern? For sure that should be in the background. But having worked with these companies, I've got a level of confidence that it's actually the provider who's the health provider who's managing that data that has access to that data. I know that the type of work the type of regulatory approvals that we have to go through, we don't have access to our own to the patients that are exchanging data on our platform. And I know that that's the same for these other companies. So I believe that most of those companies are there doing, from a privacy perspective and from a health data perspective, the right thing. It's not always the case, but I know that the big ones, and I would say, be careful. But many of the companies that we deal with are very careful around that. They don't have an intention to sell data.
Right.
They don't have an intention to, monetize every patient that's joined. Some do, and they're, bound to make that obvious. The real ones that we're worried about are ones that are gathering a bunch of data and then reselling that data without the patient being aware of that.
Right.
That's the concern. So, is there a reason that in and of itself, corporate Canada shouldn't have those systems? I don't think so. And I got to tell you, Badeo, I've sat in rooms where there's been health professionals that accuse me and our company of profiting off of the illness of others. And it's so insulting, because that's not at all the mission. That's not at all the reason we're doing what we're doing. But to be taken there very quickly, I think there's a massive problem with that. Because if that's the case, we have to rely on government for health innovation. Now I'm really concerned, because that's not where innovation should happen.
Right.
or will happen, or could happen. And the universities are somewhere in between that. You know, they do want to have, they have massive innovative ideas. Some of them want to commercialize. And then somewhere around there, you know, they've got to make a decision as to whether or not there's a financial benefit in commercializing their technology. And I've met many of these people. I can't think of one person that I've met in the health sector in the past 15 years that's trying to do it for what I'll call the wrong reasons.
Right, right.
Trying to hide the fact that they're collecting data to resell to others, for example.
Right.
Or trying hard to obscure consent from the patient. So it's unfounded, and I think, maybe this is going way off topic, I think part of that a challenge is, I think, you know, as Canadians, we kind of have this badge of honor called public health care, which I totally understand and believe in. But that doesn't mean that the public, that doesn't mean government's creating all of it. People have, you know, there's such little understanding from not a data literacy, but from a health system literacy perspective about how this actually works.
Yeah.
Over 90% of the doctors in this province are entrepreneurs.
Yeah, most people don't know that.
Chiropractors, dentists, physiotherapists, most of them are entrepreneurs, running their own businesses or running businesses in a small cottage industry. Most people don't understand that. And so I happen to think that's the right thing to do. But this combination of public pay, private business, there's something really great about that. Because it gives the opportunity for us to still feel confident in the health system, companies like ours, companies like others, being supported by the public purse because we're bettering the condition of patients. But are we government employees?
Right.
I can't think of a more challenging place for me to be.
And you do it with grace and a beautiful smile. And it's just so, but you're right.
That's not where innovation's going to occur. Innovation's going to happen around these circles and around late dinners where we're trying to figure out the best way to do something. That's where innovation's going to occur, and it's not going to happen from a funding perspective. Yes, there is a public purse that has to have certain objectives, and innovation has to be one of those. But that's the same for every doctor's office, chiropractors and physiotherapists and dentists and even psychologists. A lot of that is all private as well, but a lot of that's paid through insurance. But if you don't have insurance, you're paying for that out of your pocket, right? So anyways, I went on a tangent.
I loved it. I think you're right. I think there's this whole misconception or lack of understanding of how this health system works.
Yeah.
As an entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
And there's several stakeholders across the ecosystem. And we all want the betterment of not just, I'm a patient, you're a patient, we're all patients, not just Albertans, but Canadians, and just as global citizens.
Yeah.
And there's, what I gleaned from even just reacting to some of your comments is just trust.
Yeah, wow.
Not just trusting the system, but trusting humans.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When we take off the shackles and we take off our hats and we're not representing an organization or similar to you and I are having this conversations as humans, as friends, because we want to create a larger impact.
Totally. But you look at the erosion in the public perception of trust in the past, 5 years. Man, there's something that has to change in how we trust the information we receive.
Right.
How we trust the government parties that are trying to do something. And I'm not a government guy most of the time, but there has to be that level of trust, or else we will spend our days and weeks in fear.
Right.
Not that there can't be change and shouldn't be change, but the trust is kind of at the core of it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about challenges. If those challenges didn't exist, and in a world where, and I'm an optimist, and I have hope, in a world where we can come together as an ecosystem, how do you think we can all work together to maybe break down some of the barriers that we talked about, or break down those misconceptions, or create trust, or be open to a variety of different things, other understanding systems, or advocating for your health data, or asking questions, or being empathetic? How do we do that as an ecosystem? What needs to be true?
Oh man,
I know that's heavy. That's big.
That's big. I think that it probably comes from a shared vision of what could be. And I don't think we have that. Because I think if we shared that common vision of what could be, or had leaders that shared a common vision, I think then you start to disassemble that into segments that make sense or don't make sense, but at least they allow for a proper dialogue, as opposed to a lot of the rhetoric we've been hearing,
Right.
which is polarized, not looking for commonality, but looking for differences, focusing on the differences, and then exasperating those to fill your own purse.
Right.
That's where we're at. So I think if we had the common goals, or a future that we could envision, and then work with that in a way that would allow differing parties to actually start to have that dialogue, I think that's where it starts.
I love it. Stay tuned. Maybe there's a part 2. We'll have to revisit this later to see if that common vision has somewhat come to life.
I'm totally in.
Rohit, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I always love our conversations. I love these discussions. I think there's so much. I think you're doing amazing things. I'm a big fan.
Thank you. Let's do this every week.
Let's do it. Coffee with Rohit and Medea.
I'm happy to. This is
you.
best part of my week. Thank you.
Thank you.